Hi, I'm fixing to go over the DIY Batwing Poncho sewing pattern. And if you want to skip this part, you can look in the description below to jump chapters. Or if there's something that you want to go back and review, feel free to push pause. Here are the sizes that this sewing pattern covers. And we'll go over the bias tape measurements. So in this video, we're going to go over dimensions, in how to lay out your fabric, and we're going to be doing several markings such as top and bottom center markings, and we'll also go over the neck hole markings and measurements for the front and for the back, and we'll create triangles to make the armholes, and we're going to measure our high hip for the hemline, and we'll go over the cutting lines. These are all of the measurements for the Batwing sewing pattern. You can always pause and go back to review it. And that's it. We'll go ahead and start the tutorial, and I hope that you'll enjoy. Start by laying out your fabric with the right sides together and the wrong sides on the outside. The fold should be on the top and the selvage should be on the bottom. You'll want to pin each corner in the center top and the center bottom. Locate and mark the center of your fabric. An easy way to do this is to fold your fabric in half and with a tailor's chalk mark the center. To measure the neck hole, what you'll want to do with the measuring tape and tailor's chalk is locate the center top of your fabric and measure on both right and left 5 inches or 12.7 centimeters. It'll look like this. To create the circumference for the neck hole, what you'll want to do is locate the top center and measure downward 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters for the back of the neck. And for the front of the neck, you'll want to measure from the top center downward 2.5 inches or 6.4 centimeters. And you'll also want to mark the center bottom of the fabric with tailor's chalk as well. Now draw a line from one marking to the other to draw the neck hole, and I chose to draw it freehand, or you can use a French curve if you have one. Now onto the sleeve markings. You'll want to create a triangle on each corner on the left and right of the fabric. So measure your triangle at 8 inches or 20.3 centimeters, and then repeat it on the opposite side. Okay, for this next step, you're going to need a flexible measuring tape, and we're going to take high hip measurements, and we're going to measure from one side seam to the other side seam. And we're only taking the front measurements, not the circumference. And with that measurement, you'll divide by 2, and then you'll add 4. Now locate the bottom center, and we're going to measure and mark the high hip measurement divided by 2, plus 4. In my case, it was 14.5 inches. And repeat the measurement and marking on the opposite side. And this is what it should look like now. And this is what it'll look like once you're ready to start forming your pattern. Starting on the right, we're going to draw a line from the arm sleeve measurement all the way down to the waist measurement. Then you're going to create the triangle for the arm sleeves, and you're going to repeat it on both sides. After connecting the dots, this is what it'll look like. To cut our pattern out, we'll first have to secure the fabric. You'll want to pin each corner, the top and bottom and center of the fabric. And we're finally ready to cut out our batwing design. When you're cutting the back neckline, what you'll want to do is cut through both layers. When you're cutting the front neckline, just ensure you're only cutting through a single layer, not the back layer. Now that you're finished, you'll want to save your excess pieces because we're going to be using that to make bias tape. We're going to be making bias tape for the armholes and the neck hole. You should have enough excess pieces left over for your bias tape. You can go back and review the bias tape measurements in the beginning of the video if you need to, so you can determine how many strips of bias tape that you need to make. Obviously, I didn't have enough fabric to make long bias tape strips, so what I had to do is cut smaller strips, then sew them together to make long pieces. And for my armholes, I ended up making bias tape that was about 28 inches long for each armhole. And for my neck, it was around 31 inches. I mean, of course, that was longer than what I needed, but you know, you never know what happens. I like to have extra just in case. After pinning the edges of the bias tape together, I went to my sewing machine and sewed along the edge a 1/4 inch. Hey guys, I'm really sorry, but I accidentally deleted a few clips, and the clips that I deleted were of the making of the bias tape. And I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. But so now you're stuck with seeing my big fat arm. Apologies. So what I'm doing here is I am pressing down the bias tape after folding it in thirds. And after you finish pressing, just pin it or use clips to hold it in place and then set aside, and we'll get back to it later. I started on this project really early this morning and the sun wasn't even out, but look guys, the sun decided to make an appearance. Okay, let's recap here. So the hard part is over. We've created our design on the fabric with the dimensions earlier. We've prepped the bias tape. That's ready to go. We have it set aside. And we have the front and back piece ready to go. It's pinned and secured. And now all we have to do is sew the piece together. And okay, so let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sew a stay stitch around the neckline about a 1/4 inch from the edge or 0.5 centimeters. And for the record, the needle size that I'm using for the sewing machine is a 90-14. It's a medium weight needle. I am using flannel fabric. It's not that thick, but just in case I wanted to be safe. The next thing you'll want to do is close the side seams by sewing along a 1/2 inch along the edge or 1.25 centimeters for the seam allowance. And once you're finished sewing, repeat it on the other side. After sewing, you'll want to serge your side seams, and if you don't have a serger, that's okay. You can zigzag stitch the seam as well. Now flip your garment right side out and press it nicely. That way we can go and do a finish stitch along the side seam edge. Now let's attach the bias tape to the armhole. With the right sides together, place the bias tape along the edge of the armhole, and where the seam is, you'll want to overlap the bias tape at least a half an inch to an inch. Then pin in place and repeat it on the other side. Right here, I'm just adjusting my needle position on my machine. That way I can move the needle far over as possible. I am sewing a half-inch seam allowance. And after this, I'm going to clip off the excess. Now you'll want to give it a good press. You'll want to press the seams downward. So here what I'm doing is I'm folding over a half an inch or 1.25 centimeters and pressing while I go around. And once I fold over one time, I'm going to repeat it and fold over again. And I'm actually folding over the seam allowance that we just sewed. You'll want to have handy some pins or some clips. That way you can secure the fold while pressing, and you can keep everything in place when it's time to sew. And then you can repeat it on the other side. Here you'll want to sew as close to the edge as possible. For my garment, I chose to sew 1/8 of an inch. And to finish it off, I gave it a good pressing. Now we're going to attach the bias tape to the neck hole. And just for me, for my sake, to make it easier so the fabric was a little bit more secure, I went ahead and clipped the folded edge of the shoulders. And I flipped the garment over so the back of the neck was facing towards me. And I'm going to go ahead and locate the center of the neck. You can mark it with tailor's chalk, or you can just pin it. With the right sides together, again, we're going to overlap about a half an inch over the center where we just marked it with either a tailor's chalk or a pen. And we're going to continue to pin the bias tape all the way around the neckline. Since attaching bias tape is the same process for the armholes and the neck, I'm going to go ahead and move the clips forward to bypass the step-by-step tutorial for the bias tape for the neck. So I just finished sewing, and here I'm just removing the excess fabric along the seam line. And this will make it so much easier when it's time to roll the bias tape under and press it and sew it. Now I'm giving the garment a good press around the neckline. I am pressing upwards, and I am getting everything ready so we can do a stay stitch along the edge of the seam line. And again, we're folding the bias tape over a 1/2 inch or 1.25 centimeters, and we're going to repeat and fold it over again over the seam allowance, and we're going to press, clip, and sew along the edge around the neckline. All that's left to do is the hemming of the waistline, and you can either keep it simple and go ahead and hem it now, or you can add some flavor and add some trim, ribbon, or cute little pom-poms, or anything that would make your customization unique. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it like a slightly boho flare, and I'm going to layer it with ribbon on top of ribbon, and you'll see that here shortly. And to do so, if you do want to add some trim like I am, you're going to need a ruler, tailor's chalk or pencil, scissors, straight pin, and possibly an iron to press to keep it nice and neat. While I'm ironing out my wrinkles, if you chose to have a simple hemline and not add any ribbon, all you would need to do is fold over the edge a 1/2 inch or 1.25 centimeters around the entire circumference of the hemline. Then you would fold it over again another 1/2 inch or 1.25 centimeters. Then you would press and then sew along the edge, and then you'll be finished and you'll have a lovely batwing poncho that you can be so proud of. Okay, so to get started, all I'm doing is I'm measuring 1 inch from the edge of the hemline, and I'm marking with tailor's chalk a line, like a guideline, across the front and the back of the poncho. And be sure that the poncho is inside out. If you're adding the trim or ribbon, you'll want to ensure that the ribbon, before it's pinned to the poncho, you'll want to make sure that it's upside down, and you'll see why here in a little bit. And on the sides of the ribbon, you'll want to secure and pin in place. You'll want to do that on both sides, and then you'll want to sew along the edge as close to the seam line as possible. Then you'll want to secure the ribbon to the poncho. That way it doesn't move around while assembling the hemline. I'm probably doing this the long way around. If you have a simpler way to do this, let me know in the comments below. But the next step I did was I folded over the edge of the hemline a 1/2 inch all the way around the circumference. And then I folded it again, and I pressed it and I pinned it to get it ready for sewing. As you can see here, I'm folding the edge over and I'm slightly covering the top edge of the ribbon. Now I'm sewing along the edge. Then I'm going to press the ribbon downwards and then flip the garment right side out. Now I'm going to repeat the same process with my second ribbon that I'm going to layer on top of the first ribbon. To sew it on, this time I'll be using a zigzag stitch rather than a straight stitch. And there you have it. You finished your batwing poncho.